This photo of two friends seemed peaceful, but look closely at the man's hand on her shoulder. The National Museum of African American History and Culture receives unusual donations, sometimes items that don't fit neatly into historical categories, but that curators recognize as potentially significant. On a cold morning in February 2024, archivist Dr. Keisha Morrison opens a package that will lead her to uncover one of the most disturbing cases of modern-day enslavement hidden behind a facade of friendship and artistic collaboration. The donation comes from a storage unit auction in New Orleans, Louisiana. The letter from the buyer explains that among boxes of ordinary household items, she found a portfolio containing photographs, documents, and what appeared to be a journal. The content disturbed her enough that she thought it should be examined by professionals who could provide context and possibly investigate further. Keisha carefully removes the contents from the package. The first item is a large photograph, professionally printed and mounted, clearly styled to look like a 19th century studio portrait, despite being much more recent. A photographer's mark on the back reads, Beaumont Studios, New Orleans, Louisiana, October 1994. The image shows two people posed in elaborate period costume against a backdrop designed to evoke an antique photography studio, complete with textured columns and softly blurred scenery. The styling is meticulous, creating the illusion of a photograph from the 1,870 seconds or 1,880 seconds, except Keisha can tell from the print quality and paper stock that this was taken in the 1,990 seconds. The woman in the photograph is black, appearing to be in her late 20s or early 30s, seated in a Victorian-style chair. She wears an ornate dress clearly inspired by 1,870 seconds, fashion-puffed sleeves, a tightly fitted bodice with intricate lacing, a high lace collar, elaborate trim. Her hair is styled in an updo with decorative accessories. Her posture is composed, almost rigid, hands neatly folded in her lap. Her expression is calm, serene, even. But there's something in her eyes that Keisha recognizes from years of studying historical photographs, a carefully maintained blankness that suggests someone holding themselves very still, very controlled. Standing beside her is a white man, also appearing to be in his late 20s or early 30s, dressed in a dark three-piece Victorian suit with a vest, bow tie, and high-collared shirt. His posture conveys confidence, ownership even, as he leans slightly forward toward the camera. But it's his hand on the woman's shoulder that makes Keisha stop and examine the photograph more closely. She pulls out her magnifying glass and studies the positioning. The man's right hand rests on the woman's shoulder, but not gently. His fingers are curled, gripping, creating visible tension in the fabric of her dress where his fingers press down. This isn't a casual, friendly touch. This is a grip that communicates control, possession, a physical assertion of dominance. Keisha turns the photograph over. On the back, written in neat script, Therese and Matthew, New Orleans, October 1994, Historical Portrait Project. And below that, in different handwriting, shakier and written in pencil, much smaller, Help me, he keeps me locked. This isn't art, please help. Keisha reads the note 3 times, her heart pounding. Someone, presumably Therese, had written a plea for help on the back of what was supposed to be an artistic portrait. And now, 30 years later, that cry for help has finally reached someone who might be able to understand what it means. Keisha examines the other items in the package. There's a journal, clearly belonging to the man Matthew, filled with entries from 1992 to 1996. There are more photographs, all styled as historical portraits, all featuring Therese in various period costumes, always with Matthew positioned in ways that suggest ownership and control. And most disturbingly, there are documents, a rental agreement for a property in the French Quarter, receipts for locks and security equipment, and a handwritten contract that makes Keisha's blood run cold. The contract, dated January 1993, is titled Terms of Service and Residency and purports to be an agreement between Matthew Beaumont and Therese Williams. It states that Therese will reside in Matthew's property, provide domestic and artistic services, and maintain appropriate standards of conduct and obedience. In exchange, Matthew will provide housing, food, and artistic opportunities. The language is carefully worded to sound like an employment agreement, but the terms, especially phrases like obedience and clauses about Matthew having final authority over all aspects of Therese's daily activities, make it clear this was something far more sinister. Keisha spends the rest of that day beginning her investigation. She searches for any records of Therese Williams and Matthew Beaumont in New Orleans during the 1,990 seconds. She finds Matthew easily. He appears in city directories from 1991 to 1998 as a photographer operating Beaumont Studios in the French Quarter. Articles from local arts newspapers describe him as a photographer specializing in historically inspired portraiture and antebellum aesthetic photography. But finding Therese Williams proves much more difficult. She appears in the 1990 census as a 24-year-old black woman living in New Orleans, working as a waitress. But after 1992, she essentially vanishes from public records. No employment records, no voter registration, no property records. It's as if she disappeared. Keisha contacts Dr. Raymond Pierce, a historian at Tulane University who specializes in modern forms of slavery and human trafficking, particularly cases that involve manipulation through employment arrangements or personal relationships. Raymond has spent years documenting cases where people, especially women of color, were trapped in situations of forced labor or servitude that didn't look like traditional trafficking but were equally exploitative and abusive. Raymond calls her back within an hour. "Send me everything immediately." If this is what it looks like if Matthew Beaumont was holding Therese Williams in some form of forced servitude under the guise of an artistic collaboration, we need to investigate thoroughly and try to find out what happened to her. Keisha scans all the materials and sends them to Raymond. They arrange to meet at the New Orleans Public Library, where Raymond has already requested newspapers, police records, and any available documentation about missing persons or assault cases from the 1,990 seconds that might involve Therese Williams or Matthew Beaumont. That evening, Keisha carefully reads through Matthew Beaumont's journal. What she finds is deeply disturbing, the detailed account of a man who deliberately manipulated and trapped a woman, who used the language of friendship and artistic collaboration to hide what was essentially modern slavery. From an entry dated December 1992. Met an interesting young woman today at the cafe where I have breakfast. Her name is Therese. She's a waitress, and she mentioned she's interested in historical photography and reenactment. She's black, which is perfect for the kind of authentic antebellum imagery I want to create. I could tell she's in a vulnerable position, working low-wage jobs, struggling to pay rent, no family nearby. She'll be easy to help, and in helping her, I can create the art I've been envisioning. From January 1993, I've offered Therese a proposition she can move into the apartment above my studio, rent-free in exchange for modeling for my historical portrait series and helping with household tasks. She seemed hesitant at first, but when I explained that this would allow her to quit her exhausting restaurant job and pursue her interest in historical studies, she agreed. I had her sign a contract outlining the arrangement. The contract gives me a great deal of control, but I framed it as necessary to protect my investment in providing her housing and opportunities. She signed without reading too carefully perfect. From March 1993, Therese has been living upstairs for 2 months now. I've implemented some house rules that she initially resisted but has come to accept. She's not permitted to have visitors without my approval, I explained. This is for security and to maintain the artistic atmosphere of the studio. She must be available for photography sessions whenever I schedule them, often on very short notice. And she must perform various household tasks to earn her keep. She's beginning to understand that this arrangement requires her complete cooperation. I've made clear that if she's unhappy with the terms, she's welcome to leave. But she knows she has nowhere else to go and no money saved. From July 1993, I've begun to expand my historical portrait series to include more overtly antebellum imagery portraits that evoke the master-servant relationships of the pre-war South. Therese was uncomfortable with this at first, objecting that these images romanticize slavery. But I've convinced her that this is important historical documentation, art that forces viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about America's past. She's agreed to continue modeling, though I can tell she's increasingly uneasy. I've installed additional locks on the upstairs apartment, ostensibly for her security, but really to ensure she can't leave without my knowledge. She doesn't realize yet that I have complete control of her comings and goings. From October 1994, created one of my best portraits, yet Therese in an elaborate Victorian dress, me standing beside her in my period suit. The composition perfectly captures the dynamic I've been exploring. Her submission, my authority, the unspoken power relationship that defined 19th century race relations. Therese has stopped objecting to the themes of the photographs. She's learned that resistance results in consequences, locked in the apartment for days, food withheld, threats that I'll report her to police for theft if she tries to leave. She understands now that she's completely dependent on me, that she has no way out. This is the authenticity I've been seeking in my art-real power dynamics, not just costumed reenactment. Keisha has to stop reading, feeling physically ill. Matthew Beaumont had systematically trapped Therese Williams, using the promise of housing and artistic opportunity to lure her into a situation where he could exercise complete control over her life. He had documented his own actions in his journal, never imagining his writings would one day serve as evidence of what he'd done. She forces herself to continue reading, knowing she needs to understand the full scope of what happened to Thérèse. From January 1995. Thérèse attempted to escape yesterday. She waited until I left the studio for supplies, then tried to climb out a window. I returned before she could get away and have taken measures to ensure she can't try again. I've installed bars on the windows, told her it's for security against break-ins, and I've taken her identification documents for safekeeping. She has no ID, no money. There's no way to prove who she is if she did manage to leave. She's crying a lot lately, but she'll adjust. This is what I need for my art, the authentic emotional reality of captivity. From June 1995, Thérèse asked today if she could contact her family. I told her absolutely not. I've created a story about her owing me money for rent and food, convincing her that if she contacts anyone, I'll have her arrested for theft. She believes this threat, though legally it's nonsense. But she doesn't know that. She's completely isolated now, completely under my control. The photographs I'm creating document this reality, the power I have over her, the submission I've forced. This is art that tells truth about American history, about the dynamics that have always existed between white men and black women in this country. From December 1995. Thérèse wrote something on the back of one of the photographs, a plea for help I discovered later. I confronted her about it, and she claimed it was part of the artistic narrative of the piece. I didn't believe her, but I've decided to keep the photograph as is. Who would see it? Who would believe her if they did? I've kept her hidden for 3 years now. As far as anyone knows, she left New Orleans in 1992. She's a ghost, completely erased from the world, existing only in my studio and in these photographs I create. Keisha meets Raymond at the New Orleans Public Library 2 days later. Raymond has been searching through police records, missing persons reports, and newspaper archives from the 1990 seconds. What he's found provides crucial context but also raises urgent questions about what ultimately happened to Thérèse Williams. I found a missing persons report filed in February 1996, Raymond says, spreading out photocopies of documents. Thérèse's sister, living in Houston, filed a report with New Orleans police stating that she hadn't heard from Thérèse in over 3 years. The sister said Thérèse had called her in late 1992 saying she was moving into an apartment above a photography studio in the French Quarter, but after that, all contact stopped. The sister tried calling, writing letters, nothing. She finally filed a police report. Keisha examines the police documents. The investigation was minimal. Officers went to Beaumont Studios and spoke with Matthew Beaumont, who claimed Thérèse had moved out in early 1993 and he didn't know where she'd gone. Police accepted this explanation and closed the case as subject relocated, no evidence of foul play. They didn't investigate at all, Raymond says angrily. They took the word of a white man over the concerns of a black woman searching for her sister. If they'd actually searched the property, if they'd examined those locks and bars, if they'd found Thérèse being held captive upstairs, but they didn't. They just closed the case. They continue searching and find more troubling information. In June 1996, Matthew Beaumont abruptly closed his photography studio and left New Orleans. Property records show he sold the building where Beaumont Studios had operated. After 1996, he appears in various cities, Atlanta in 1997, Houston in 1999, Phoenix in 2001, but there's no consistent trail and he never seems to stay anywhere long. Most importantly, there's no record of Thérèse Williams after 1992. She never shows up in census records, never registers to vote, never appears in employment records, never applies for a driver's license renewal. She's simply gone. We need to find out what happened to Thérèse, Keisha says. The journal ends in December 1995. The studio closed in June 1996. What happened in those 6 months? Raymond searches through New Orleans newspapers from early 1996 and finds something that provides a possible and disturbing answer. From the Times-Picayune, the 15th of March, 1996. Suspicious death investigated in French Quarter. Police are investigating the death of an unidentified black woman whose body was discovered in the Mississippi River near the French Market on March 12. The woman, estimated to be in her late 20s to early 30s, had been in the water for an undetermined period. Cause of death has not been established. The woman carried no identification, and police are asking anyone with information to come forward. Due to the condition of the body, identification has been challenging. Raymond finds a follow-up article from April 1996. Unidentified woman buried. The body of the woman found in the Mississippi River in March has been buried in a pauper's grave after police were unable to establish her identity. An autopsy determined cause of death as drowning, but could not establish whether the death was accidental, suicide, or homicide. The case remains open, but with no leads. Police acknowledge identification may never be possible. Keisha and Raymond sit in heavy silence. They both understand what they're looking at. Therese Williams, held captive for over 3 years by Matthew Beaumont, likely died in early 1996. Her body was found but never identified because she'd been erased from all records, because no one knew to connect a Jane Doe from the river with a woman who'd been reported missing weeks earlier. "We need to find Matthew Beaumont," Keisha says, "and we need to find Therese's sister. If there's any possibility that the unidentified woman from 1996 was Therese, her family deserves to know." Over the following weeks, Raymond works with genealogists and investigators to trace both Matthew Beaumont and Therese Williams' family. He finds that Beaumont died in 2019 inches, Albuquerque, New Mexico, at age 56 from heart disease. He died alone, never married, and the storage unit containing his journals and photographs was abandoned and eventually auctioned when no one claimed his possessions. Raymond also finds Therese's sister, Patricia Williams Johnson, still living in Houston. Patricia has spent nearly 30 years searching for Therese, never giving up hope that her sister might still be alive, never accepting that Therese would have voluntarily cut off all contact with her family. Keisha calls Patricia, her voice gentle but direct. "Mrs. Williams Johnson, my name is Dr. Keisha Morrison from the Smithsonian. I've been investigating what happened to your sister Therese. I've discovered evidence that suggests Therese was held captive by a man named Matthew Beaumont from 1993 until at least December 1995, and possibly until early 1996. I need to share some difficult information with you, and I need your help to establish what happened to Therese." Patricia Williams Johnson's response is immediate and emotional. "Captive? I knew something was wrong. I knew Therese wouldn't just disappear. When I filed that missing persons report in 1996, and police said they'd talked to some photographer who claimed she'd moved away, I knew they were wrong. Therese would have contacted me. She would have let me know where she was. What evidence have you found?" Keisha explains what she's discovered, the journal documenting how Matthew trapped and held Therese, the photographs showing her in controlled poses, the contract that gave Matthew authority over her life, and the plea for help Therese had written on the back of one photograph. "And I need to tell you about something else," Keisha says carefully. "In March 1996, an unidentified black woman's body was found in the Mississippi River in New Orleans. The woman was never identified and was buried in a pauper's grave. The timeline and description match when and where Therese was last known to be alive. I think there's a strong possibility that was Therese." Patricia is silent for a long moment. When she speaks, her voice is thick with tears. "Therese died alone, unidentified, and was buried without her family knowing. And the man who held her captive, who likely killed her, was never held accountable." "I'm so sorry," Keisha says, "but I want to help give Therese her identity back, to tell her story, to make sure people know what happened to her. Would you be willing to provide DNA so we can try to confirm whether the unidentified woman from 1996 was Therese?" Patricia agrees immediately. Over the following months, Keisha and Raymond work with forensic specialists and the New Orleans coroner's office to exhume the remains of the Jane Doe buried in 1996. Patricia provides a DNA sample, and forensic analysis confirms what they all suspected: the unidentified woman was Therese Williams. The coroner's office amends the death certificate, and Therese is reinterred with her name on her gravestone. But Keisha, Raymond, and Patricia all want more than that. They want Therese's story told fully and honestly, want people to understand that modern slavery still exists, that women, especially women of color, can be trapped in situations of forced servitude hidden behind facades of employment or personal relationships. Working together, they also push for a criminal investigation into Matthew Beaumont's actions, even though he's now dead. The New Orleans Police Department reopens the 1996 case, now classified as a homicide, and acknowledges that their failure to investigate properly in 1996 likely allowed Beaumont to kill Therese and escape accountability. 13 months after Keisha first opened that package, the National Museum of African American History and Culture opens the exhibition Hidden in Plain Sight: Therese Williams and Modern Slavery. The exhibition occupies a somber gallery designed to honor Therese while unflinchingly documenting what happened to her. The centerpiece is the 1994 photograph Therese seated in her elaborate costume, Matthew standing beside her with his hand gripping her shoulder in that telling way. A magnified detail draws attention to Matthew's hand, the curled fingers, the tension, the grip that communicates possession and control rather than friendship. Beside it is an explanation. This photograph was styled to look like a 19th century portrait, but it was taken in 1994. The man, Matthew Beaumont, was holding Therese Williams captive in his New Orleans photography studio, forcing her to pose for elaborate historical photographs while denying her freedom, identification documents, and contact with her family. The grip visible on her shoulder documents the control he exercised over her life. The exhibition tells Therese's complete story through documents, testimony, and historical context. It displays excerpts from Matthew's journal where he documented his deliberate manipulation and imprisonment of Therese, showing how he used promises of housing and artistic opportunity to trap her, then used isolation, threats, and physical restraint to keep her captive for over 3 years. One section focuses on the photograph itself and how it hides the truth behind a facade of artistic collaboration. The exhibition explains how Matthew Beaumont used the language of art and historical reenactment to disguise what was actually forced servitude and captivity, how he claimed to be documenting historical power dynamics while actually perpetuating them. Another section examines the broader context of modern slavery, showing how tens of thousands of people, predominantly women of color, are trapped in forced labor situations in the United States right now. Statistics, case studies, and testimony from survivors document how modern slavery operates through manipulation, isolation, threats, and control, rather than chains and bills of sale. The exhibition includes documentation of how police failed Therese, accepting Matthew Beaumont's claims without investigation when her sister filed a missing persons report, never searching the property where Therese was being held captive, failing to identify her body when she died and ended up in the river. This failure represents a broader pattern of how law enforcement often fails to protect women of color from violence and exploitation. A section on Therese's life before captivity shows who she was, a young woman with dreams and plans, a sister who loved her family, someone who was working hard to build a better life when she was trapped by Matthew Beaumont's manipulation. Family photographs, testimony from Patricia Williams Johnson, and records of Therese's life before 1992 establish her as a full human being, not just a victim. The exhibition also documents the investigation that finally brought Therese's story to light, how the journal and photographs were discovered 30 years after her death, how researchers pieced together what happened, how forensic analysis finally identified the Jane Doe from 1996 as Therese Williams, and how her family finally learned the truth about what happened to her. A video plays continuously featuring Patricia Williams Johnson talking about her sister, about the 30 years she spent searching, about learning the terrible truth, and about her determination to make sure Therese is remembered. Other survivors of modern slavery share their experiences, explaining how they were trapped and how they escaped, giving voice to people whose suffering often remains hidden. On opening day, Keisha stands in the gallery watching visitors engage with the exhibition. She sees people study the photograph, understanding gradually what that grip on Therese's shoulder really means. Not friendship or artistic collaboration, but control, possession, evidence of captivity hidden in a posed portrait. Patricia Williams Johnson stands beside her, looking at her sister's photograph. Therese was 28 years old in this picture, Patricia says quietly. She'd been held captive for about 18 months by the time this was taken. She'd already tried to escape and been caught. She'd already been isolated from everyone who loved her. But she found a way to leave a message, to write that plea for help on the back of the photograph. She was asking someone, anyone, to notice that something was wrong, to help her. And for 30 years, no one understood what she was trying to say. But now, finally, people are hearing her. A young black woman approaches them, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for telling Therese's story," she says. "My best friend went missing 5 years ago under circumstances that never made sense. She moved in with a man she'd just met who promised to help her, and then all contact stopped. Police said she probably just wanted a fresh start and didn't want to be found. But I never believed that. Seeing Therese's story, understanding how modern slavery works, it's making me wonder if my friend is trapped somewhere, if I should push harder for investigation." "Yes," Patricia says firmly. "Push harder. Don't accept easy explanations. Don't let police dismiss your concerns. My sister was trapped, was killed, and was buried without a name because police didn't investigate properly. Don't let that happen to your friend." Throughout the day, visitors engage deeply with the exhibition, learning about modern slavery, understanding that Therese's story isn't an isolated case, but represents a pattern of exploitation that continues today. The photograph that seemed to show two friends in artistic collaboration reveals itself to be evidence of captivity, documentation of abuse, testimony preserved in the tension visible in a man's grip on a woman's shoulder. As the museum prepares to close that evening, Keisha walks through the gallery one more time. She stops in front of the photograph, looking at Therese Williams's face, the composed expression, the stillness, the eyes that carry knowledge of captivity, even though her pose suggests serenity. She thinks about Matthew Beaumont, who trapped a young woman by promising to help her, who held her captive for over 3 years under the guise of artistic collaboration, who documented his own crimes in journals because he never imagined he'd face consequences, who likely killed Therese when she tried to escape or threatened to expose him, and who died 30 years later without ever being held accountable. She thinks about the systems that failed Therese police who didn't investigate properly when her sister reported her missing, authorities who never identified her body when she died, a society that allows women of color to disappear without intensive searches or demands for justice. And she thinks about Patricia Williams Johnson, who spent 30 years searching for her sister, who never gave up even when everyone else said Therese had chosen to disappear, who finally learned the terrible truth, but also finally got to bring her sister home and tell her story. The photograph waited 30 years to reveal its truth. The image that seemed to show a peaceful artistic collaboration between friends actually documented captivity, abuse, and control. Therese Williams's carefully composed expression hid her desperation, but the grip visible on her shoulder told the truth about her situation to anyone who knew how to read it. Now, the photograph has fulfilled a purpose Therese surely intended when she wrote that plea for help on its back. Her story has been told, her identity has been restored, her family knows what happened to her, and her case has shed light on the ongoing reality of modern slavery that traps thousands of people, especially women of color, right now in America. As visitors file past the image one last time, many stopping to look closely at that grip on Therese's shoulder and understanding what it really means. Keisha thinks about all the other photographs that might contain hidden cries for help, all the other people trapped in situations of modern slavery, all the other families searching for loved ones who have been disappeared by traffickers or captors. Therese Williams's story documented in Matthew Beaumont's own journal, preserved in photographs that seem artistic but actually document abuse, finally revealed when his possessions were auctioned after his death, has been told fully and honestly. And Keisha is grateful to have played a part in ensuring that Therese's voice has finally been heard, that her sister has finally learned the truth, and that her story will help others recognize the signs of modern slavery and understand that captivity can exist hidden behind facades of friendship, art, employment, or personal relationships. Patricia Williams Johnson stands looking at the photograph one last time before leaving. Every time I look at this image, she says, I see both the horror of what Therese endured and the courage she showed in trying to communicate what was happening to her. She left a message on this photograph asking for help. For 30 years, no one understood. But now we do. Now her truth has been told. And maybe, just maybe, someone else who sees this exhibition will recognize that someone they know is trapped, will understand the signs of modern slavery, will push for investigation and help someone escape before it's too late. Keisha nods, understanding. The dark truth hidden in Matthew Beaumont's grip on Therese Williams's shoulder was that modern slavery exists, that captivity doesn't always look like chains and locked rooms, that women of color can be trapped and erased and killed while living in plain sight in American cities. But the deeper truth revealed through Therese's story is that victims find ways to resist and communicate even in captivity, that families never stop searching. That truth eventually emerges even when covered up for decades, and that telling these stories can save lives by teaching people to recognize the signs of modern slavery and demand action. Therese Williams, trapped in 1993, held captive until 1996, killed and left unidentified, finally given her name back, and her story told in 2024 is no longer a forgotten Jane Doe. She is Therese Williams, Patricia's sister, a woman who was trapped and killed, but who left testimony that would eventually be understood, whose story now serves as both memorial and warning, whose voice has finally been heard calling out for help across 30 years, saying, look closely at the hand on my shoulder. See what it really means. Understand that I was trapped, not a friend, but a prisoner, and do not let this happen to anyone else.